Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this webinar on engaging stakeholders in building decarbonization planning, an introduction to community affordable housing, health, economic inclusion, and other stakeholders. I'm Annika Brindle, Director of Residential Retrofits for Energy Equity, or R2E2 for short, at ACEEE. Before starting off with some housekeeping announcements, I will turn it over to our interpreters to explain how you can access simultaneous Spanish interpretation during today's webinar. Ana?
Hello. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Ana Vidales, and I'll be interpreting this afternoon for you. Buenas tardes, soy Ana Vidales, y yo voy a estarles dando el servicio de interpretación simultánea. Si ustedes quieren escuchar este seminario en español, lo que tienen que hacer es al fondo de su pantalla, dentro de poco van a ver ustedes un icono que dice interpretación, que es un globo mundial. Tienen que darle ustedes clic y entonces eligen español. También tienen la opción de silenciar el audio original. Si ustedes eligen esa opción, van a escuchar al intérprete al 100%. En cambio, si ustedes lo dejan abierto, escucharán al intérprete a un 80% y al ponente principal a un 20%. Si ustedes están uniéndose a esta reunión por medio de un teléfono o un iPad, tienen que ir a los 3 puntitos que dicen More, se van a Interpretación, eligen su idioma de preferencia y es bien importante que después elijan Done o Terminar. También lo mismo aplica para lo que es silenciar el audio original cuando se unen por medio del teléfono o iPad. Muchísimas gracias. You can enable interpretation now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ana. And now some housekeeping announcements. We are recording this webinar and we'll be making it available to all registrants within a few business days. To ask a question during the webinar, please submit it via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, not in the chat. You can upvote questions in the Q&A box that you would like to see addressed. And use the chat. Please use the chat to engage in respectful and productive discussion with other participants. Our code of conduct is that R2E2 will not tolerate behaviors that cause harm or disrupt the learning environment. Please direct message Stephanie Sosa-Coulter with ACEEE if you feel unsafe in this space. Disruptive participants may be removed from the webinar. And now I would like to introduce Cassie Grimes from the U.S. Department of Energy Buildings Technologies Office, who will be providing a brief overview of the Buildings Upgrade Prize before we get into the specific subject matter of today's webinar.
Thanks, Annika, and thank you all for being here today. The Buildings Upgrade Prize for Buildings Up, next slide, actually. The Buildings Upgrade Prize is designed to rapidly scale energy efficiency and efficient electrification upgrades to existing buildings all across the country. This is not a prize to upgrade a single building, but rather to develop an initiative that will complete many building upgrades in your building upgrade zone. The prize is envisioned to consist of 4 phases over approximately 5 years, subject to approvals and the availability of funds. We are currently in phase 1, the concept phase, which will award over $22 million in cash prizes and technical assistance to teams. Applications for phase 1 opened on February 18th, and it will close on July 18th, 2023. We are seeking 20 to 60 winning teams to join the Buildings Up co-opetition. We call it a co-opetition rather than a competition because we are not looking to crown a single winning team at the end. Instead, we hope to see as many teams as possible move through the prize phases successfully. To address this challenge, we will need all hands on deck, working together and sharing our best ideas with one another to move farther and faster together. An application support bonus prize is currently open to support new and under-resourced teams to develop and submit their phase 1 applications. We'll cover the application support prize in more detail in a couple of slides. Next slide. Let's take a step back for a moment and talk about why energy efficiency and efficient electrification is so important. For those who are less familiar with the energy sector, it is essentially divided into two parts. The first is the supply side, and the second, the demand side. The supply side is where our energy is generated. This may be through coal-fired power plants, natural gas running directly to buildings, nuclear power, or increasingly from electricity generated by renewables. Renewable energy generated by wind turbines and solar arrays is becoming a larger share of our energy supply every day, which is great. But this prize is not focused on the supply side. Buildings Up is focused on the demand side, or how our buildings use energy. As the grid becomes cleaner and cleaner, we need to prepare buildings to be able to make use of that clean electricity from renewable sources. This means two things: reducing the total energy a building needs through energy efficiency measures, such as installing attic insulation and doing air sealing, and upgrading the buildings to be able to use that clean electricity by transitioning them to efficient electric equipment, such as heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, and efficient electric appliances. Next slide. Buildings Up aims to address the persistent administrative, financial, social, and other barriers to energy efficiency and reducing on-site emissions from existing buildings. We have the technologies available to get there. We have efficient electric equipment like heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, and building efficiency measures such as insulation and air sealing. But we need to make these technologies more accessible. Only about 1% to 2% of buildings in the country are retrofitted for energy upgrades each year, which isn't fast enough. We need innovations to address the non-technical barriers, the persistent financial, social, administrative, and other barriers to improving our buildings. Buildings Up is a capacity building prize that will support teams to develop solutions that accelerate building upgrades beyond current best practices, are scalable and replicable, are built to last beyond the period of the prize. And Buildings Up also seeks to benefit underserved communities by ensuring that at least 40% of the prize benefits accrue to equity eligible buildings, their occupants, and the surrounding community. Next slide. Buildings Up applicants are asked to select one of two pathways. The Equity-Centered Innovation Pathway will award $400,000 in cash prizes for each winning team. For this pathway, teams will commit at least 80% of their building upgrade initiative implementation on equity eligible buildings, which I'll explain more in the next slide. The Open Innovation Pathway will award $200,000 in cash prizes for each winning team. For this pathway, applicants are not required to focus on equity eligible buildings. Technical assistance to build out concept submissions into implementation plans will be provided to all winning teams. Next slide. For the purpose of this prize, equity eligible buildings are defined in 4 categories to meet the requirements of the Equity-Centered Innovation Pathway. The first is based on geographic location, which includes buildings located within Justice 40 census tracts, tribal lands, both federally and non-federally recognized, and US territories. The second is affordable housing and housing occupied by low-income residents. The third is underserved commercial, nonprofit, and public buildings. And the fourth is team-defined. We recognize that there may be specific local conditions or considerations that could make buildings equity eligible in a designated area. Additional information about equity eligible buildings is available in section 3.5 of the official prize rules. Next slide. This slide provides several examples of project types that applicants could propose for Buildings Up. For example, a community-based organization in a mid-sized town could partner with their local government to bring heat pumps to affordable housing buildings in their community. For all proposed initiatives, Buildings Up is especially seeking innovation and overcoming the persistent and non-technical barriers. Next slide. Buildings Up is seeking innovation in overcoming challenges such as lack of contractor and occupant familiarity with technologies, high upfront costs for upgrades, insufficient workforce to scale upgrades, lack of reach of funding and incentive programs, and inconsistent quality of upgrades. Next slide. The application support prize is meant to encourage applicants who might otherwise not have the staff capacity, time, or expertise to submit a full phase 1 submission. The primary intended competitors for the application support prize are first-time applicants for DOE Building Technologies Office funding and community-based organizations representing or serving areas with equity-eligible buildings. Qualifying teams can apply for one of 50 prizes of $5,000 and 10 hours of technical assistance with our partners at Elevate to help them complete a phase 1 submission. The application support prize is open and will be awarded on a rolling basis until the funds are expended. 12 applicants were selected during round 1, and the next submission deadline with 38 remaining prizes is March 15th. Next slide. I encourage you all to head to the HeroX page, which is available at the link shown here and by QR code to follow the prize, read the rules, and apply for the phase 1 prize or the application support bonus prize, which are both open. The next informational webinar that goes more in depth on the prize, eligibility, and scoring will be on Friday, April 7th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Registration is available on HeroX. Thank you all, and I'll hand it over to the R2E2 team.
Thank you, Cassie, for that overview of the Buildings Upgrade Prize. Now for today's topic, which we hope will help you all prepare strong applications for the Buildings Upgrade Prize, engaging stakeholders in building decarbonization planning and introduction to community, affordable housing, health, economic inclusion, and other stakeholders. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Annika Brindle, Director of the Residential Retrofits for Energy Equity Initiative at ACEEE. R2E2 seeks to scale up retrofits to affordable housing nationwide, and R2E2 is supporting DOE's Buildings Upgrade Prize. I will be one of your presenters today. Your other presenters are Diana Morales, also with ACEEE, and Callahan Saltzer with HRNA Advisors. So our goal is to get you all to start talking or to talk more across sectors and to better understand each other's motivations. To do that, we want to get a baseline of how connected you already are to different sectors. So please enter the following in the chat: name, pronouns, organization, location, what native land you are on, and the answer to the welcome question. And Stephanie will demonstrate by pasting my answer into the chat right now. The welcome question is: in the past 2 weeks, I have directly interacted with stakeholders from blank, how many, of the following sectors, not including my own sector. Answer 0 through 5. And the sectors are listed on the slide here. Pause a second for folks to start putting their answers in. So hopefully you all will appreciate seeing who's in the room. I know that I appreciate seeing that, and the rest of our team appreciates seeing that, and seeing the level of connection folks already have across sectors. Whoever you are or whomever you're representing, welcome. We are grateful that you've joined us, and it is important to have you in the room today. Please keep inputting your answers as I review today's learning goals. So there is a tremendous opportunity right now to scale up energy upgrades in affordable housing, as we are seeing an unprecedented influx of new federal funding opportunities from COVID dollars, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and the Inflation Reduction Act. At the same time, we know that programs created or expanded without consultation, partnership, and co-leadership across sectors, and without community, will miss opportunities to target community priorities, meet owner and renter needs, and achieve multiple benefits beyond just greenhouse gas emission reductions. With that in mind, here are our learning goals for today's session. Learn about people with a potential role to play in scaling up building energy upgrades to equity eligible buildings, including affordable housing. Begin to understand some motivations and potential partnership roles of various stakeholders. Draw inspiration from examples of how stakeholders have successfully partnered, and identify 1 to 2 next steps in assembling a team to scale building energy upgrade initiatives in equity eligible buildings. For the Buildings Upgrade Prize, teams will submit applications composed of narratives about their concept plans. Concept plans are scored based on how strongly reviewers agree with scoring statements. And the scoring statement categories are listed on the right. And on the left are some that are most applicable to this webinar today. I just want to give some examples of what kind of statements are included here. So for example, under criterion 1, one of the statements is the team has sought out diverse stakeholder perspectives, including with historically marginalized communities, to assess and understand challenges to building upgrades. Another one in that category is the team demonstrates a comprehensive understanding of the challenges to energy and efficient electrification in the building upgrade zone. So that just gives you a flavor of what's included there and why it's so important to talk to folks from other sectors in order to get a comprehensive understanding, in order to get folks at the table, in order to seek out diverse stakeholder perspectives. Here is a brief outline of what we will cover today. And just a reminder to please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A, not the chat, at any time. So first, some context on equity eligible buildings, which are the types of buildings that teams will focus on if they are pursuing the equity-centered innovation pathway. Our presentation today is focused on stakeholders that are most relevant to applications that focus on equity eligible buildings. So what are equity eligible buildings? Cassie briefly covered this, but just listing out here again that this includes buildings in Justice 40 census tracts, affordable housing, underserved commercial, nonprofit, and public buildings, as well as team-defined equity eligible buildings. The official rules document provides more guidance on ways to develop a local equity eligible building definition. So, what are the benefits of cross-sectoral collaboration in designing multiple benefit programs or initiatives? Energy upgrade or retrofit initiatives are often designed without a broad cross-section of stakeholders and community at the table. As a result, they are often designed only with energy goals in mind. It may be difficult to achieve multiple benefits and objectives via these initiatives without including stakeholders from across multiple sectors in that initiative design process. However, doing so can bring many benefits. For example, achieving multiple goals, decreasing greenhouse gas emissions, increasing housing and energy affordability, advancing racial equity, promoting economic inclusion and local workforce development, and improving health and safety. It can also help program planners incorporate valuable perspectives and leadership from groups that are traditionally excluded, such as community members, under-resourced households, renters, or just generally folks from sectors other than energy. It can also leverage input and lessons learned to overcome sector-specific barriers, lead to alignment with existing programs, and help achieve economies of scale. Stakeholders collaborating on initiative design might be from different sectors within a state and or local government, or they may reach across the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. For example, energy and housing departments might collaborate within a single city. A sustainability office might work with a state housing finance agency, or a city department might partner with the state energy office or a utility on enhancing weatherization delivery. Community engagement and leadership are essential components of collaborative strategy design. Racial equity considerations. What does it look like for the initiative development process and its outcomes to lead with a racial equity lens? Stakeholder and community engagement can be important avenues for incorporating racial equity into the initiative development process and outcomes. We know that the burdens of high energy and housing costs and poor housing quality are not shared equally across different incomes and demographic groups. To quote from ACEEE's Energy Equity Initiative, committing to equity in clean energy programs, policies, and investments can improve and expand clean energy services and technologies for marginalized groups while creating more just processes, outcomes, and systems. Many groups have historically been underserved by energy efficiency and clean energy programs, including Black communities, Indigenous communities, people of color, low-income individuals, youth, older adults, recently arrived immigrants, those with limited English proficiency, and people with disabilities. And to this, I would add renters. I want to especially highlight the critical role played by having authentic leadership roles for frontline community-based organizations and leaders. Engaging and funding entities that are closest to frontline communities brings invaluable perspectives and insight into this work. And here we're showing the 4 types of equity: structural equity, where decision makers recognize the historical, cultural, and institutional dynamics that have led to clean energy inequities; procedural equity, where decision makers create inclusive and accessible processes for developing and implementing clean energy initiatives; distributional equity, where clean energy initiatives fairly distribute the benefits and burdens across all segments of communities; and transgenerational equity, where decision makers consider the impact on future generations of the clean energy initiatives that they develop. The next portion of this session covers 9 key stakeholder groups. We added one, who can bring valuable insights and play leadership roles in the development of programs and initiatives to upgrade affordable housing and other equity eligible building types. So these groups are energy and sustainability departments within state and local governments, both community-based organizations and community members, affordable housing owners, providers, and advocates, affordable housing funders and government agencies, whether state or local, underserved commercial stakeholders, low-income energy program administrators, health entities, economic inclusion stakeholders and workforce development providers, and energy or buildings experts and funders. This is a very complex ecosystem of players, and I'm sure you're noticing the theme that folks don't always talk to each other across sectors. So the first group we're going to touch on only briefly, because government energy and sustainability offices are not typically overlooked when folks think about clean energy initiatives. And in fact, they are often leading and setting the vision and goals for government clean energy and climate activities. There are various roles these entities can play. First, they may receive federal funding for clean energy initiatives, both from existing and new funding sources. Other agencies may also receive such funds. Second, they can launch or run or fund retrofit programs using federal or other dollars. We will cover the Weatherization Assistance Program, which is federally funded and state-run later on in this session. They might focus on specific interventions or technologies that complement existing offerings by other entities, such as government or utilities. This might come in the form of rebates, grants, or low, no interest loans. For example, the cities of Chicago, Minneapolis, and Cincinnati fund retrofit programs. Third, they can refer to or promote programs via existing touch points, for example, rental licensing, low-income home ownership programs, etc. Fourth, they can require and fund upgrades, sometimes as a condition of receiving funding or participating in certain government programs. Building energy performance standards would fall in this category. Though these policies are mandatory, it's important to note that affordable housing will often have trouble complying with these policies unless there is funding available to comply. BTO does have resources available for folks wanting to learn more about building energy performance standards. But energy upgrade requirements can also be attached to voluntary programs or programs that are already funding building rehabilitation. These would generally be run out of a housing agency rather than an energy agencies. These are just examples of things that various departments are doing. Fifth, these offices should be creating accessible processes to bring in community leadership, including by shifting the location, times, languages, etc., of their activities to accommodate community needs and/or by supporting community-led work. These agencies may or may not have strong relationships with community. The second group we'll cover is community. So here we're specifically thinking about frontline marginalized and underserved communities, which includes community-based organizations such as environmental justice, social and racial justice, economic justice, tenant rights, and housing justice groups, community leaders of all types, community members, in particular those who are historically underserved or who face barriers to participating in government processes such as public hearings, comment opportunities, etc., and homeowners and renters with low incomes, including from both multifamily and single-family properties. Accountability and transparency are especially important for governments and others to consider when collaborating with community members and organizations in order to overcome challenging power dynamics and mistrust that may exist. This means setting up structures to ensure that follow-through on commitments occurs, that there is clear communication about roles in the partnership and about how community feedback will be used, and that there is transparent reporting back on progress, no matter the degree of success. Here are examples of motivations and needs of community stakeholders, directing benefits to those most impacted by climate change and most left out historically by clean energy programs, mitigating gentrification, displacement, and high housing and energy costs for households, addressing urgent community priorities that may or may not be aligned with affordable housing retrofit programs, protecting limited time and capacity, having decision-making power alongside government actors and accountability from government actors, developing local economies and contributing to wealth building, and receiving accessible, culturally relevant, clear information about what is being offered and what is possible from a partnership. For example, a list of options in terms of scale, capacity, timeline, etc., rather than being asked, what do you need? So that there's a better sense of how to work together and what role community could play. Community-based organizations' roles in developing energy upgrade programs and initiatives can go far beyond providing input and gathering input. We'll dig more into this during our upcoming community-driven planning session. ACEEE's 2021 report, Fostering Equity Through Community-Led Clean Energy Strategies, outlines the following potential roles for community-based organizations in clean energy efforts. Participating in formal policy processes, for example, providing feedback, filling decision-making roles, developing accountability frameworks and having direct oversight, building community influence through partnerships and coalitions, delivering clean energy services to maximize benefits to local communities, developing community-led workforce programs and trainings, and building long-standing capacity in communities for locally led clean energy efforts. Role mapping can also be a valuable exercise. I'd like to share some insights from R2E2's strategic advisor, Climate Innovation. In role mapping, a government or other program administrator takes a look at all the roles needed to run an initiative and assesses which roles they or consultants are doing well or not well. The goal is to ask, how might ownership be moved closer to the communities being targeted by the programs? Some of the roles or gaps identified may be better carried out by CBOs, and government can share resources to facilitate CBO efforts. It's important to note that each of these roles should be a funded role, since community members bring valuable expertise, lived experience, and community connections to the table. Funding may range from stipends, food, and childcare to signed MOUs and contracts for larger amounts. Now I will turn things over to Callie from HR&A Advisors to talk about affordable housing stakeholders.
Thanks, Annika. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thanks for all your questions. I see you populating. When we are talking about the types of housing that need upgrades, and I think we've already touched on that a little bit, but don't want you to worry too much about the differences in housing types, but really focus on housing where people live in your communities in kind of a broad sense. So for our R2E2, we're really talking about housing where people live, where utilities are a burden, right? So it can be rental, it can be owner occupied housing, it can be apartments, condos, houses. You know, to Annika's point, it could be single family, multifamily. The point is it's housing where people live, in particular, people of low or moderate incomes, and where utilities can be a serious burden every month. So the circle on the left sort of tries to illustrate that, right? That, you know, the universe of housing and the broader blue circle, and within that are all these different types of housing. But the program and the competition is open for all of the above. Next slide. I can do that. Thank you. So we want to also just think about the role of government in affordable housing. So just as a very quick primer on the many activities of government and the various levels of federalism, government that interplay with housing. So, you know, the federal government does a lot around rules and regulations and funding for major programs, Section 8, home CDBG, public housing, it's technically Section 9, as well as COVID relief programs like ARPA. You know, Treasury runs the state and local fiscal recovery funds, or CRF, I believe we're calling it. So there's obviously a huge role for federal agencies and federal departments. There's also a big role played by state housing finance agencies. And they run a really important program or administer what is federal dollars that hits the states and then goes from there to the locals, which is the low-income housing tax credit program. And, you know, that finances housing through allocation of tax credits and various partnerships that are developed to finance LIHTC, as we often call it in the industry, projects. They also have the ability to really incentivize and or mandate building energy efficiency in exchange for financing that they provide. They do that, the sort of tool that they can do that with is their qualified allocation plan. At the state level, the QAP is really the place where you want to see energy efficiency kind of baked in for extra points on a LIHTC project. You want to be able to really incentivize it there. Local governments, probably a lot of you interact with local governments in a variety of ways, but you know, think of them as a partner in providing subsidy for buildings or the upgrade of affordable housing. They're often sort of the last partner to kind of close a gap, if you will, in a deal where an affordable housing project has a financing gap. Local partners are often the ones closing it because they have a you know, public policy goal of creating, building, or sustaining affordable housing. They also administer a lot of federal home programs, which we mentioned above, home and CDBG in particular. And then they also kind of set the zoning and entitlement structure, right? So where can you actually build? What kind of density can you create in certain places? What's the housing code? And does anything in the code or the zoning actually mandate or enforce energy efficiency or, you know, climate resilience or other measures of sustainability? And then lastly, housing authorities own and operate public housing. So technically there's, you know, a part of HUD that is the Public and Indian Housing, PIH, and then public housing authorities are sort of the implementer of all things public housing. They own and operate housing. They administer housing vouchers. They set the utility allowances. So they're a really key partner, especially for getting at low and extremely low income households. And so think about all of these groups as potential partners. Next slide, please. When we talk about affordable housing owners, we're really thinking here about the person who essentially pays a mortgage every month, not the rent, that would be the renter or the tenant, but the owner is whoever has financial risk in the property because they either built it or it is their business to operate it, to own and operate it. And it's critical, we think, to talk to owners in designing a program because we need to make sure that their motivations and their incentives are aligned so that they will actually do the project, right? So you need to be able to create a financial thesis, if you will, for why why this should even be done, because sometimes energy efficiency measures have a longer payback period than is obvious to the owner who's just sort of operating it for a certain amount of income. So really think through the motivations of the individual owners and how can you actually help them recoup the costs of an initial investment. Does the upgrade increase their property value? Those are possible motivators. And they may not be aware of all the incentives that are out there at the state level or utility program level, and certainly other types of federal dollars as well. So really think about, the types of owners you want to work with and make sure that you're trying to create the right set of incentives and align incentives, because we want to make programs that are attractive and can accommodate, compliance constraints for them, and also want to integrate and coordinate with existing funding and financing timelines. So something that makes sense at the project level, not just sort of conceptually. Next slide, please. When we talk about housing funders, there's a huge ecosystem out there of providers and foundations, NGOs, CDFIs. I don't want to throw too many acronyms. We try to just put the acronyms in here so you have a reference point if you're not familiar with what a CDFI is. For instance, a community development financial institution. They operate a lot like a bank, but provide financing. They also do a lot of technical assistance and actually a lot of community building efforts. There's amazing CDFIs out there if you aren't familiar with, like National Housing Trust and groups that are doing both technical assistance and financing of retrofit projects and affordable housing. So start to think about who's operating as a CDFI, who's in your network, how do you kind of link up with them? And how do you work directly with nonprofit and for-profit owners of affordable housing? They do that, right? A lot of them work with CDCs and neighborhood-based groups day to day, and have been doing so for 30 years. And they have the long-standing relationships with neighborhood-based groups. So they're a great partner to think about working with. They have capital to deploy. They often also have goals around sustainability. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going a little fast for interpretation. I apologize. Thank you. Okay. So CDFIs, and the last thing I said, I'll just say it a little more slowly. They often have goals around environmental sustainability, governance, ESG, we call it, financing goals, and just generally very well resourced and networked in neighborhoods that we want to reach with R2E2. Other nonprofit organizations can also serve as developers or operators of affordable housing. They are, mission motivated. They exist to serve vulnerable populations or communities of color or low-income populations or some version of all the above. Nonprofits have their individual mission, and if that mission can align with the goals of your retrofit program, it's a great pairing. And also, a lot of nonprofits have gotten into the business line of creating and rehabbing housing for low and moderate income families. So there are a lot of smaller nonprofits that do hyper-local rehab work. So think about who's doing that in your neighborhoods, and who's actually already engaged on the ground in building systems work at the, sort of in single family or small rental. Those could be potential partners. Lastly, banks and lending institutions, tend to be providing more conventional financing. So they're not always going to be able to work with partners that don't have an established track record of being a borrower, right? So banks and lending institutions can be a good partner because they have financing. They can hold the loan, including Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, right? Like these are institutions built to lend at scale. They have a lot of capital to deploy. They need to deploy a portion of that into low-income communities or neighborhoods of disinvestment. And they also need to meet some of those same environmental sustainability and governance goals. And they want to be seen often as, you know, leaders in climate and energy efficiency. It doesn't mean that they necessarily have capital that is like willing to really lead in that space, but some of them do. So start thinking through, you know, what kind of capital would we actually need to assemble, and what kind of partners do we need to bring to the table, you know, in addition to the grant funding that could be available through a program like R2E2. All right, and I believe we're just going to do a check-in now. So this question, if you can populate as you've been doing, after hearing about different community and affordable housing stakeholders, can you think of a way in which you'd like to explore engaging with some of these groups? So is there a question you would like to ask? You know, a partnership you would want to explore, a new kind of stakeholder that you think could be relevant in your community? Would love to hear answers. Thank you.
Please do go ahead and add your questions to the Q&A throughout, and add your answers to this checking question in the chat. Thanks so much, Kelly. So we will talk next about underserved commercial, non-residential, equity eligible buildings stakeholders as these answers come in the chat. Pages 17 to 18 of the official prize rules contain additional details about eligibility for this building type. And just briefly listed in a little more detail here, what are the types of non-residential equity eligible buildings defined by Buildings Up. So buildings located within DOE designated Justice 40 census tracts, federally and non-federally recognized tribal lands, and US territories. And then underserved commercial, nonprofit, and public buildings. And then there's some additional detail here that I'll just let folks take a look at briefly. So some stakeholder types that are relevant to this space of underserved commercial, though this depends on how you define underserved commercial locally, include community leaders who may help identify priority building types, community engagement strategies, and community priorities in planning and implementation. Small and medium-sized business owners who can help identify prevalent barriers to upgrades and opportunities to improve and scale upgrade offerings. Local governments who may collect and be able to provide access to data to identify underserved commercial buildings, coordinate across agencies and entities to streamline services, help braid funds, or convene stakeholders. Utilities who provide services and incentives tailored to the needs of different types of underserved commercial entities and can help with outreach and engagement of customers that they're already working with. And contractor and trade ally networks who can help identify common building needs, provide energy assessments, and undertake high quality upgrade projects. Our next stakeholder group is low-income energy program administrators. I'm going to focus on just 3 types. The first 2 are administrators of the Weatherization Assistance Program and the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. Both are federally funded programs administered by state agencies, though often not the same state agency. Weatherization reduces energy costs for households with low incomes by increasing the energy efficiency of homes. The Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP, addresses energy bill shortfalls and emergencies through bill payment assistance. The third type is utility energy efficiency programs, which are typically administered by utilities, but can also be run by a state agency using utility funds. So why might you want to engage these program administrators? In the case of LIHEAP, there may be the opportunity to receive referrals to past or current program participants, or to gain insight into communities experiencing high need. Also, both weatherization and LIHEAP are often implemented by community action agencies, which can have deeper ties to community that can be leveraged. In the case of weatherization and utility programs, there may be an opportunity to achieve economies of scale by piggybacking on existing offerings. And I know of examples already where weatherization and utility programs work to complement each other's offerings. For example, in the instance where the weatherization program focuses just on single-family homes, a utility program might choose to complement that offering by focusing more on multifamily. Either of these programs may have gaps that administrators would be eager for partners to fill. Programs may have limitations in what they can or choose to include in their offerings. For example, weatherization must spend its entire federal allocation on an annual timeline, including a recent massive federal cash influx. Despite this cash influx, federal rules mean that agencies can only spend a certain amount per home, meaning that a weatherization administrator or local implementer still has to leverage outside funding if they want to undertake more comprehensive upgrades. Rising construction costs also limit how deep retrofits can go under existing spending caps. And weatherization turns away many homes, at least initially, because they are not able to allocate enough of their funding for the health and safety needs present in homes that must be dealt with before weatherization work can occur. Lastly, as I mentioned earlier, many community action agencies focus their efforts on 1 to 4 unit properties, or even just on single family homes, even though properties of 5 or more units are also eligible for upgrades. These 3 limitations or gaps, which are comprehensiveness, health and safety, and 5 or more unit multifamily, present potential opportunities for partnership. It's worth talking with your state weatherization administrator or local implementer to see what opportunities they see. For utility programs, utilities may have state-imposed constraints such as cost-effectiveness tests, or self-imposed constraints that result in gaps in their programs. These might include not serving particular building types, for example, only single family or only master metered buildings, only offering quick payback measures such as light bulbs and faucet aerators, that is, no comprehensive or deep treatment of buildings, or not offering electrification measures such as air source heat pumps or heat pump water heaters. It's worth talking to utility administrators to understand what gaps exist, and to their program implementers, which are typically third parties, to understand opportunities for filling these gaps with new offerings. Community stakeholders and interveners in public utility commission proceedings, for example, clean energy advocates, or even public utility commission staff, can be another good source to learn about utility program gaps and shortcomings. So our next group is health entities. The home environment can have a profound influence on health and well-being. Residential retrofits that improve energy efficiency can also make homes safer and healthier, especially when such measures correct indoor air quality issues. Vulnerable populations are especially susceptible to in-home health and safety hazards. Specifically, building upgrades can reduce exposure to mold, moisture, and lead, improve indoor air quality, lower the risk of gas leaks or explosions, reduce emergency room visits and missed days of work and school related to asthma and other respiratory diseases, improve mental health, and reduce the thermal stress of extreme heat and cold. There are a variety of health entities working to improve public health and reduce healthcare costs who may be interested in partnering on programs to improve energy efficiency in homes in a way that also improves occupant health. As you can see here, health entities provide a variety of services, and many are also motivated to reduce healthcare costs, which can sometimes be achieved by home upgrades. Some entities are already running healthy home programs that seek to remove asthma triggers and lead hazards from homes. These may be municipal, nonprofit, or private. Health initiatives and healthy homes programs may also present opportunities to piggyback on existing efforts in cases where programs are already in homes installing upgrades. Homes with health hazards are often inefficient as well, and there are some key measures that can improve both health and energy efficiency simultaneously. For example, replacing failing gas equipment. Another type of intervention might be repairing a hole in the roof where moisture is intruding and then installing insulation in the newly dry attic or walls. On this slide are some examples of health programs that present potential partnership opportunities. In these examples, funding comes from the federal level and is then administered locally. And we see examples where entities are running in-home lead abatement programs, working to modify homes to remove asthma triggers, working to reduce federal healthcare spending via clean energy upgrades, et cetera. It may be worth talking to health entities in your area to understand the types of in-home health and safety hazards they are most concerned about, to access their health data, and to discuss the potential for partnership. Typically, these are state health and human services agencies. Sometimes county agencies play a role. It can be helpful to build a coalition of local governments and other stakeholders in order to approach the relevant state agency. As one example, the CHIP Health Services Initiative can unlock millions of dollars in money for health services. We've listed Michigan's CHIP program here, and Wisconsin has a program that addresses in-home asthma triggers, for example. The next category is economic inclusion and workforce stakeholders. We will use our partner Emerald Cities Collaborative's definition of economic inclusion. So economic inclusion goes beyond workforce development. It includes high road employment and contracting opportunities and improved access to those opportunities for historically marginalized people and communities. That is BIPOC, women, at-risk youth, etc. The high road employment part of this is what is traditionally referred to as workforce development and refers specifically to individuals. There is also a business support ecosystem that works with contractors and businesses. High road refers to policies that encourage competition based on quality rather than cost and favor firms that internalize the true costs of business by providing good wages, benefits, growth opportunities, and working conditions, adhering to laws and regulations, and pursuing best practices with respect to community engagement and the environment. So who are the key stakeholders in this category? In this case, we're looking across both workforce and business development stakeholders. So we have high schools, community colleges, and universities that can offer training, supply contractors, or supply students for the workforce. Universities may operate weatherization training centers. Then there are city or county workforce development agencies. They may run programs for incumbent workers to upskill or provide services, for example, case management, career exploration, job placement to opportunity youth. That is an officially defined term. Opportunity youth are low-income 16 to 24-year-olds who have left high school or are underemployed. There are also Youth Build or Job Corps program administrators. These are programs for opportunity youth funded by the U.S. Department of Labor. Youth Build primarily builds homes for low-income households. There are 273 Youth Build programs across the country. Administrators may be CBOs or any of the other entities I just named. Job Corps administrators may be nonprofit or for-profit entities running one of over 121 Job Corps centers across the country. In terms of the business support ecosystem, you have apprenticeship program administrators, such as unions, labor management organizations, et cetera. And you have small business development centers, which are locally administered centers funded by the Small Business Administration. They provide technical assistance, coaching, and access to loans related to business planning. There are also business associations and chambers of commerce. This includes MBE, WBE, and specific ethnic business associations. This also includes specialized chambers of commerce, for example, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Why should you reach out to workforce and business development stakeholders? Again, some wisdom from our partner Emerald Cities Collaborative. Climate actions, such as building retrofits, result in demand for certain types of goods and services. These are economic opportunities. But details matter. How retrofits are implemented will influence whether economic outcomes are high road and equitable. These efforts will either reinforce existing economic disparities or change them. Without intentionally working to correct for inequities, retrofit projects will tend to be part of a larger system that will inadvertently perpetuate inequities by reinforcing exclusion, low road jobs, and wealth disparities. Focusing on economic inclusion can help align retrofit work with other priorities within a jurisdiction, including economic recovery, racial equity, and repairing harm from government actions. So what might partnership with these stakeholders look like in the context of developing an upgrade initiative? Retrofit projects can create community benefits, such as opportunities for local workers and for businesses located within or connected to disadvantaged communities. Partnerships can establish community benefits agreements with the community, set targets and require reporting on hiring workers from disadvantaged communities, create opportunities for new workers or those who have been left out of the labor force to receive training. Apprenticeship programs and community colleges are great sources of talent, and leverage retrofit projects for on-the-job training or other work-based learning opportunities. So our last group, energy and building experts and funders. These are the types of folks you may already be used to working with for clean energy projects. Technical experts can advise on building needs, program design, appropriate technologies, costs, and benefits. This can include how to ensure that electrification results in stable or lower bills for low-income residents rather than higher bills, for example. Energy service companies or ESCOs operate performance-based programs and can manage and finance large upgrade projects. As an example, in 2014, the Boston Housing Authority completed the largest public housing energy efficiency retrofit project in US history, working with energy service company Ameresco. The project resulted in natural gas and water savings of more than 30% and saved more than 4.8 million annually in utility costs. It also created approximately 600 jobs for local union workers, public housing, and low-income city residents and small and minority-owned businesses. Clean energy advocacy organizations are often familiar with gaps and shortcomings of existing programs, with new and emerging models, and with best practices in the field. Green banks, where they exist, which is not everywhere, can combine public and private funds to speed adoption of commercially available technologies. Some examples are Montgomery County, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. Implementers of on-bill programs can offer energy upgrades to a utility customer at no or reduced upfront cost with repayment tied to the customer's utility bill or meter. Case studies.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dee. I'm a research analyst on the local policy team at ACEEE. And in these next few slides, I'll be briefly talking about some case studies of collaboration across different stakeholders that we've discussed throughout the webinar to give some concrete examples that folks could look to. So first on the list is DC's Affordable Housing Retrofit Accelerator Program, which is an example of city government working with affordable housing stakeholders. The city engaged a roundtable of affordable housing owners and nonprofits for recommendations on how to design building energy performance standard rules that make compliance feasible for affordable housing. The Minneapolis 4D program is an example of working across local government departments. So the city collaborated across economic development and sustainability departments on the 4D program, which was a successful strategy for collaborating to both preserve affordable housing and provide energy incentives. Providence, Rhode Island wrote its climate action plan with an advisory group of community-based organizations that wrote most of the plan. And Milwaukee's, Wisconsin's home-funded rental rehabilitation loan program. This program was largely developed by city government staff and informed by some consultation with community-based organizations, small neighborhood property developers, and lenders. The Department of City Development organizes quarterly meetings with neighborhood associations, residents, community development corporations, local businesses, and churches to get feedback on the department's initiatives, listen to their housing concerns, and address housing code compliance issues. So these groups offered considerable help in building relationships between the city and neighborhood landlords, and steering other city services to address renter housing needs. Next slide, please. So this next case study is actually based on a blog post by Slipstream, which is an energy efficiency nonprofit, where they shared honest reflections on collaborating with a local CBO and a utility on a pilot project aimed at low-income households. So we'd like to take a second to commend Slipstream on this type of honest reflection, because it really shows that collaboration and partnerships are not always easy. So some lessons, key takeaways from this case study by Slipstream. The first is that breaking commitments to the community breaks community trust and undermines CBOs. So in this instance, when the utility changed program offerings without any sort of explanation, it broke trust with the CBOs and also the communities that the utility was trying to target with the pilot program. Another takeaway is that making assumptions about community needs and carrying forward with assumptions without asking questions is a clear sign of problematic power dynamics. It's important to know that communities often know their own solutions. And the last lesson we highlight here is to trust community-based organization partners to course correct with you and maybe even prove you wrong. In this case, both Slipstream and the utility had to learn to get comfortable with taking a back seat and being wrong. So there's, of course, a lot more to say on collaborating with CBOs, but we'll be touching a lot more on this collaboration in other webinar sessions. So make sure to join us for that, please. And I'll hand it back over to Annika for a quick check-in question.
Thanks, Dee. So we have thrown a lot of information at you. What can partnerships among these entities look like? Say you want to create a program that works for subsidized affordable housing, then partners like the State Housing Finance Agency, local affordable housing developers, and CDFIs might be key. On the other hand, if you want a program that fills health and safety gaps in the weatherization assistance program, then the State Energy Office, local community action agencies, the city health department, environmental justice organizers, and even a local health provider might be the right fit. For a program that seeks to fill workforce gaps and serve unsubsidized housing, you might work with your city's housing department, a local affordable housing advocacy group, a tenant rights organization, and your local community college. These are just hypothetical scenarios, and there are many permutations of local stakeholders who could help your department or organization accurately assess the highest priority issues and the most promising solutions to address them. So for our check-in question, given the priorities, needs, and/or gaps in your community, which stakeholder who is not at the table is it most important to bring to the table? If you don't know the highest priorities, greatest needs, or biggest program gaps in your community, consider choosing community as your answer. Please input your answer in the chat. And I invite everyone to see what other folks are seeing as the highest priority stakeholder to bring to the table in their community. And as we proceed, I just invite folks to keep providing those answers and to seeing what your peers have to offer. Okay, potential next steps in assembling your team.
All right, so I'm going to take back over here. So we'd like to start to round off the conversation with a couple of concrete next steps that folks can start to take. So one of these next steps that we'd like to highlight is called ecosystems mapping, which can help in identifying and selecting a community partner. So this slide is from the perspective of a government agency needs, such as an energy or sustainability agency. One of the first steps in ecosystems mapping is to secure participation from other government agencies and start identifying trusted CBOs that are working on issues such as climate and environmental justice, anti-displacement, energy affordability, to name a few on the list. So the potential partners should be aligned, accountable, trusted, connected, be effective, and also have the capacity to collaborate long-term. So to start doing this work, you might want to start doing some research on potential partners online or via your own networks. And once you've identified some potential partners, you should meet with them, and we recommend meeting with 1 to 3 potential CBO partners. Then you can move on to selecting your CBO partners, and very importantly, provide compensation to community-based organization partners for their expertise. And another very important step in this process is to find some time to develop a plan for sharing power and decision-making abilities with your community-based organization partners. The resource listed in this slide includes an ecosystem mapping process guide, which includes criteria on how you would actually select a CBO partner. So please be sure to check out this link in the slide if you have more detailed questions on selecting a CBO partner. Next slide, please. So one of the next steps you can start to take is to start engaging in stakeholder conversations. This work takes a lot of time, so it's best to start immediately. And to start your stakeholder conversations, much like we've already said in previous slides, begin identifying trusted entities that are already doing some of the work that you're interested in partnering around. Reach out to the different stakeholder types listed in this presentation, and really try to understand and find alignment with your stakeholders' needs, motivations, and current programming. And another thing that's important to note is to start identifying the challenges to the work that you and your partners would like to partner around. Next slide, please. So we'd like to highlight the importance of starting to do community engagement early on as a next step. Very importantly, we'd like to note that not all types of community engagement are equally impactful. And you can see that here in this very nice spectrum here. It's called the spectrum of community engagement to ownership. And it's a self-assessment and planning tool created by Facilitating Power. So you might need it as one or both. And the more impactful community engagement starts to happen at around 3, 4, and 5 on this spectrum. So as you can see here, there's a section on the spectrum that indicates increase in impact. If you start at 3, you can see that the impact is to increase voice, which elevates the needs and assets of communities into processes and planning. Under 4, delegated power increases the capacity of communities to play leadership roles and in making decisions. And lastly, at 5, community ownership, which fosters democratic participation and bridges the divide between community and governments. So some of you might be thinking that on the spectrum, you might be at a 3 and want to improve and move up to 5. But you may find that you're not able to move up to 5 until you have more things in place, like resources, conditions, removal of constraints, more staff, increase the capacity of communities to participate, etc. So it's important to understand this in a timely fashion so that you make sure that any constraints to moving up on the spectrum are addressed early and adequately. So with that, I'll hand things off to Annika to wrap things up. Thanks.
Thanks, Dee. So here's just a brief review of our learning goals and takeaways from today. There is a tremendous opportunity right now to scale up energy upgrades as we are seeing an unprecedented influx of new federal funding. So just want to encourage folks to take what they're learning today and think about how it can be applied in their community and to the Buildings Up application in order to put forward a strong case for upgrades in your communities. Resources and Q&A, and here we have some links to resources that we shared, mentioned, or drew on during this presentation. You will be able to access these links once we post the presentations online in the next week or so. And I just want to quote from a new lease on energy. One of the resources listed here: community engagement is designed to specifically reach targeted communities such as those that have been historically marginalized from decision-making or have experienced disproportionately high burdens and low benefits from previous policies and programs. Community engagement can often be confused with stakeholder engagement, and that resource will help define the difference between stakeholder engagement and community engagement for you. Stakeholder engagement focuses on engaging with people or organizations that have historically been recognized as having a direct stake in an initiative and its effects. So definitely wishing everyone the best as you start or continue having these conversations, not only with stakeholders who we may have mentioned or not mentioned today, but also with the community. To support teams in developing strong applications, we're actually offering a series of training webinars, which you may have already seen the list, but they are shown again here. Topics range from collaborating across sectors to an introduction to building retrofits, community engagement, funding sources for financing building upgrades, and many other topics. And then my request for you before you leave today is to fill out this Zoom poll that Nick is going to open now to let us know what types of learning you might want to participate in upcoming group technical assistance sessions. So please go ahead and fill out this poll, and we're going to then move on to our Q&A. And I really appreciate everyone being here and look forward to answering your questions. Nick, should I stop sharing?
Sure. Let me know when you want me to share the results of the poll and end the poll.
Sure, yeah, and do we have a second question too? Oh, they're both up here. Let's give it 10 more seconds. Okay, great. Nick, do you want to share those results back out? So we're going to use the results from this poll to plan our upcoming technical assistance sessions. There will be a session specifically related to today's topic in 3 weeks, but additional TA sessions after that when you can also continue to ask questions. And then we'll also put in the chat the direct email if you have questions not related specifically to this webinar, but to buildings up in general, logistics, applying, et cetera. So you can ask those questions directly of NREL and to DOE. Great, and I think I am going to turn it over to Ian, who is going to get us started with our Q&A.
Hey everyone, I'm Ian with ACEEE for the R2E2 initiative. So we have a number of questions, so we'll start off with the Buildings Upgrade Prize questions. The first one for Cassie is, are local governments eligible for the Application Support Prize?
Yes, local governments are eligible. And I also, just to get ahead of it, there was one other question about can a nonprofit be the lead applicant? And the answer to that is also yes.
And from the same questioner, they asked, additionally, do applicants have to include both weatherization and electrification efforts? Can they choose one or the other in addition to other programs like solar programs?
So Buildings Up requires that the minimum technologies of weatherization and efficient electrification upgrades be included in the initiative, but solar and other technologies are also allowed as long as the minimum technologies are included.
And the next question is, what is a Justice 40 census tract?
So when we say Justice 40 census tracts, we mean census tracts that are designated as disadvantaged based on criteria that was developed from the White House's Justice 40 executive order. The Department of Energy definition of disadvantaged communities and an associated mapping tool that actually allows you to identify census tracts on a map of these communities. Those are referenced in the equity eligible buildings definition, which is in section 3.5 of the prize rules.
And another questioner asks, what sort of arrangements count as partners? How many engaged stakeholders or partners are needed for a competitive application? Can for-profit companies be a partner?
There's no limit or minimum number of partnerships that are required for Buildings Up. For-profit companies are eligible to be applicants and or partners. A strong application will include all of the key stakeholders needed to implement a building upgrade initiative in your community or designated building upgrade zone.
And the last question related specifically to the prize is related to the letter of recommendation from a CBO. Which types of stakeholders would be considered CBOs?
And so in the Buildings Upgrade Prize rules, we have a definition for community-based organizations. And so we define that as organizations that are nonprofit organizations that are representative of a community or segments of a community defined by place or population, and provides financial, educational, cultural, and or other resources aimed at enhancing health, wealth, and overall community well-being. For-profit entities and large nonprofits with a particular area of focus beyond the local level are typically not included in that definition. And ideally, CBOs are physically based in the communities they serve. Those, in some cases, they can be effective even without a physical presence. So I recommend checking the definition in the rules for more info.
Great. So we'll move on to more broad questions. There was a question about how funding is rolling out to states, and that question was answered in the chat with a link. The questioner that asked about how state allocations will be distributed, please see the chat. There's a link to your question in there. The next question that we have is for Annika, and it's, do you have more information on the successful Boston project that you referred to, resulting in reduced usage of water and electricity?
Yeah, so ACEEE's August 2021 report, A New Lease on Energy, Guidance for Improving Rental Housing Efficiency at the Local Level. That's one that I highlighted on our resources slide. It includes a write-up of that case study, and I am pasting the link in the chat right now in case you want to learn more about that case study and other activities.
And the next question is there a regional or local general listing of energy or building experts and funders who have expressed an interest or past involvement in participating in R2E2?
So R2E2 doesn't maintain such a listing, but DOE and NREL's HeroX platform supports folks to find partners for the Buildings Upgrade Prize. You can register there to find folks interested in teaming, and I will put that link in the chat right now.
Okay, and then we have some questions for Callahan. The first one is, how many stakeholder groups or types of stakeholders is it best to partner with?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's not a minimum, right? I think you really need to look at the capacity that each partner brings and the various strengths that each brings to the table. So you might have some partners that are more on the financing or capital side. You might have partners that are actually going to do the very hard work of engaging the community. So we don't have a target in mind. We just want to see teams that make sense together, where you've done the work of kind of aligning goals and you're on the same page about shared goals, and that you're not trying to do everything with the project, right? You can't necessarily reduce all greenhouse gas and, you know, decarbonize and also electrify and also save tenants a bunch of money, and also, you know, projects are going to have to tailor through partnerships a few goals, and maybe start there. Think about the goals you actually want to achieve, and that the project can't necessarily achieve everything under the sun, if that makes sense. And what partners do you need at the table to achieve those goals?
And we're moving on right now to our last question. This is for Jasmine, and it is, how might a health plan provider be counted as a true partner in a project if they don't or can't provide funding to the project?
Ian, I think we actually might have lost Jasmine, so I'm not sure if there's somebody else who can take the question.
Gotcha.
I can try. And Annika can weigh in maybe too. We can imagine healthcare partners and think about that broadly. Like, there's healthcare partners, there's health plans, like insurance plans. There's also hospitals and like partners that are very locally focused. You know, for a hospital, can imagine projects that you know, relate to electrification and distributed energy resources, and you know, working with the grid to make sure that there's durability there. With healthcare and health insurance plans or managed care organizations, I think there's a lot of precedent to look to related to affordable housing and the very real cost of very real cost that those institutions or health plans experience related to chronic homelessness and people who you know, are experiencing some kind of housing instability. So there's connections to be made there. Even if they're not bringing money to the table, they may have you know, an interest or some kind of stake in creating more stable, more efficient, more you know, just better housing outcomes. Annika, do you have anything to add?
No, thanks for adding that, Kelly.
Oh, one last thing on the healthcare partners. You may find if you're doing something at scale that you need a partner who can kind of back the neighborhood-based groups with like a loan guarantee or something. So think about them as a potential partner for, they don't have to actually put any money into a project, but they could be like an unfunded guarantee. A lot of foundations play that role. So, you know, they might be able to actually kind of credit enhance the overall financing of the project. And we can talk about that more in subsequent sessions.
And Ian, it looks like another question came in for the Buildings Up team.
Oh, great. So this is a question for the Buildings Up team. It says, must the specific building to be retrofitted be identified, or is the building census tract identified enough?
So for this question, I just first want to be clear that the Buildings Upgrade Prize is intended to support initiatives that plan to upgrade many buildings, either across the geographic area or a specific building type, since these solutions are meant to be scalable and replicable. So a single building upgrade is not eligible for this prize. However, when identifying equity eligible buildings, applicants may identify them by individual building locations. You may identify many buildings in a census tract. It all depends on the scope of the initiative, whether that's upgrading all buildings within a census tract or within a neighborhood. But that sort of information is up to the applicant.
Great. I think that's all the questions that we have. And so we have about 3 minutes left.
Thanks for fielding those questions, Ian. I just want to encourage folks to head over to the HeroX website to check out the rules and guidelines around Buildings Up. That link is just above in the chat, as well as to forward any questions that they think of after the webinar is over to buildingsup@nrel.gov. Where those are specific to Buildings Up rules, the DOE and NREL team will work on answering them and posting them in the public FAQ, which you will also find on the HeroX site. And where they are specific to today's webinar content, the R2E2 team of experts will work on answering those so that we can get those answers posted as well. And yes, the recordings will also be posted in both English and Spanish. Thank you everyone for joining today. I really appreciate you taking this time to learn about the stakeholders that you can partner with in this type of work, and have a great rest of your afternoon.